I hadn't seen my son in 5 years. So when Marcus called to invite me to a surprise birthday dinner at his new mansion, something inside me cracked open. Hope, maybe, or foolishness. I wore the scarf my late husband gave me and whispered to his photo, "Maybe tonight I get my boy back." But the moment I stepped through their marble doorway, I knew something was wrong. Jade's smile was too wide, the guests too polished. And then, just as I reached for my wine glass, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Don't drink, don't sign, they're watching." My fingers trembled. My son's eyes sparkled across the table, his voice warm and rehearsed. For years, I begged for his love. Tonight, he offers it freely, but something in my gut whispered louder, "This isn't love, this is a trap." The house creaked like old bones settling. Every corner whispered a memory Eleanor had stopped trying to forget. The air was heavy with silence, but not peace, the kind of silence that came after years of voices faded, after laughter thinned into echoes. Eleanor, 68, sat in the kitchen where the paint had started peeling above the windowsill. She sipped her tea slowly, not for the taste, but for the ritual. The cup was one of a pair. Her husband's had chipped years ago, but she still kept it in the cabinet as if he might come downstairs any moment and ask for a refill. Outside, snow gathered softly on the porch railing, thick and white like the frosting she once piped on birthday cakes. Her hands trembled more these days, arthritis mostly. But part of it was just time. It had a way of loosening you, like threads unraveling slowly. She placed the cup down gently and reached for the framed photograph on the kitchen shelf. Her husband Samuel wore his old mechanic uniform, grease on his cheek, a half smile beneath his mustache. Beside him, a young Marcus, maybe 8, missing a front tooth and holding up a wrench like it was a trophy. That boy, he'd made her believe sacrifice was worth it. She ran the laundromat for 30 years. Rain, snow, holidays, migraines, didn't matter. She opened shop at 6 a.m., scrubbed out machines at midnight. When Samuel passed from a heart attack 15 years ago, she didn't cry in public. Not once. There were too many bills, too many customers needing their whites starched and socks matched. Eleanor kept going. For Marcus, for the future she thought they both wanted. He was smart, always was. Ambitious, too. Said he wanted more than the soap suds and broken zippers kind of life. She understood. That's why she gave up her own dreams, so he wouldn't have to. She missed parent-teacher meetings, scraped together college tuition, pawned her wedding ring once when the boiler went out. But Marcus drifted. The calls came less frequently. Holidays were filled with awkward voicemails, if that. He always had meetings or was traveling. Then one day, he just stopped showing up. Her fingers tightened slightly on the photo frame. Last week, she dusted the hallway. It was habit now. Wipe the mirrors, dust the corners, straighten the frames. That's when she noticed something was missing. The space above the radiator, once occupied by Marcus's wedding photo, was bare. The faint outline was still there, a rectangle of dustless wall. The photo itself, gone. Eleanor stood staring at the spot for several minutes. She hadn't even known the wedding had happened until a neighbor mentioned seeing it online. She'd never received an invitation, never met the bride. She didn't even know her name then. She'd told herself for years that there must have been a mistake, that maybe the letter was lost, maybe he thought she wouldn't want to come. But deep down, Eleanor knew better. The omission wasn't an accident. It was a message. And now, after all that silence, a birthday invitation, a surprise dinner, as if he'd just remembered she existed. She pressed her palms against the kitchen table, feeling the familiar grains of the wood Samuel had built by hand. The weight of loneliness settled on her shoulders, not the sharp sting of abandonment, but the dull, aching kind that lingered. A pigeon flapped near the window, startling her slightly. She looked up and caught her reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, deep lines, hair silver and unstyled. There was no one to impress anymore, no one to greet her at the door, no one to say, "You look beautiful, Elle." Her gaze drifted to the corner of the room where Samuel's toolbox still sat beneath the counter. She hadn't opened it in years. The latch was rusted, the handle worn smooth from his grip. She thought of Marcus again, holding that tiny wrench. He'd used to say he wanted to be like his father, strong, steady, wise. Now he was none of those things. Or maybe he was, and she had just become too blind to see who he really was. She sighed, rising to place the photo back on the shelf. Her back protested with a dull ache, but she ignored it. Routine was her glue now. Each movement stitched her to the day, to the hours she controlled. She moved into the living room, the floorboards moaning softly under her steps. A single armchair faced the television, though it rarely played anything but static when storms hit. She passed by the empty coat rack, her fingers brushing against the space where Marcus's jacket once hung, back when he used to come home muddy from soccer practice. Atop the mantel, beside the urn of Samuel's ashes, sat a stack of unopened letters, catalogs, bank statements, and one, still sealed, with no return address. She picked it up, studied the handwriting. Hers, from years ago. A letter she'd written Marcus after his wedding, but never sent. The words inside were more apology than anger. "I miss you, son. Not just the boy you were, but the man I hoped you'd become." She thought about that line often. It still felt true. Eleanor returned to the kitchen and stared again at the empty wall. Maybe tonight would change nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, it would change everything. The call came on a Wednesday morning, just after Eleanor had finished ironing a set of pillowcases she didn't really need to iron. The phone rang twice before she picked it up. No one ever called anymore, and part of her suspected it was another insurance scam or a political robocall. But the name on the screen froze her hand mid-air. Marcus. She hesitated before answering, her thumb hovering like it might trigger a trap. "Hello?" "Mom," he said, and that word struck her like an old song she hadn't heard in years. "It's me, Marcus." Her breath caught. His voice sounded older, smoother, confident, but still held that same edge she remembered from when he used to ask for money. "I hope I didn't wake you," he continued quickly. I know it's been too long, way too long. I've been thinking about that, about you." Silence stretched. Eleanor stared at the floral curtain dancing slightly in the morning draft. "I've been meaning to call. I've wanted to, but work, life, you know how it gets." She didn't reply. She let the quiet speak for her. "Well," he cleared his throat, "Claire and I, Jade, she's been planning something for you, a surprise. But I'm ruining the surprise by calling, I guess." He chuckled like they were old friends catching up. "A dinner, this Saturday. For your birthday. She's making that lemon chicken you used to like. You'd be the guest of honor. Really, it'd mean a lot to us if you came." Eleanor sat down slowly, the edge of the chair digging into her spine. She could hear birds chirping outside, oblivious. "My birthday's not until next week," she said quietly. "Well, we wanted to celebrate early," he said, a little too fast. "Schedules, you know." "Schedules." "Yes," she said, more to herself than to him. "I know." For a moment, she almost declined. The memory of the missing wedding photo still lingered in her chest like a bruise. But then something else stirred. Curiosity, perhaps. Or a final thread of hope. And the part of her that still saw that 8-year-old boy holding a wrench, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. "I'll come," she said, surprising even herself. Marcus exhaled like he hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. "That's wonderful, really. I'll send a car. Pick you up at 6. When the call ended, Eleanor sat still for a long time. Then she moved. She went to her dresser and opened the bottom drawer where she kept memories, not clothes. From inside, she pulled a small handkerchief, neatly folded, Samuel's. It still smelled faintly of engine oil and cologne. She tucked it carefully into her purse. Then she opened the second drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope. The letter she'd written Marcus years ago after his wedding, the one she never mailed. She placed that in the purse too, not as a weapon, as a tether, in case the night made her forget who she was. At 5:55 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up to her curb. Not a taxi, not a rideshare. Something private, fancy. She tightened her coat and stepped out into the cold. The driver, a young man in a pressed suit, opened the door for her without saying a word. The inside of the car smelled like new leather. Eleanor settled in, her knees aching from the movement. She clutched her purse on her lap, her fingers brushing the edge of Samuel's handkerchief. They drove through town slowly. She recognized streets she hadn't been down in years. Elm Street, where Samuel first kissed her. The corner laundromat, where she learned the ropes. The school, where she used to wait in the car for Marcus on rainy afternoons. Each turn of the wheel brought a rush of memories, some sweet, some sharp, all inescapable. She noticed, after 20 minutes, that the route wasn't right. "Isn't the freeway faster?" she asked softly. The driver glanced at her in the rear-view mirror, his face unreadable. "Mr. Marcus asked me to take the scenic route. He said it might bring back good memories." Her heart tightened. He remembered that? Or was this someone else's idea of sentiment? She nodded, unsure what else to do. But then the road curved unexpectedly. They passed a highway sign that pointed away from Montclair, where Marcus supposedly lived. The houses here were fewer, the trees thicker. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firmer. "I think we're off track." The driver didn't respond at first. His hands gripped the wheel tighter. Then finally, "Just a shortcut, GPS rerouted. We'll be there in 5. Eleanor's chest constricted. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her purse. Her instincts, honed by decades of being both mother and business owner, began to buzz like a faulty wire. "Pull over," she said. The driver glanced at her again, this time his brow furrowed. "Ma'am, I assure you—" "Now," she said sharply. He didn't stop, but within 3 minutes they turned onto a gated road with stone columns at the entrance. A massive home rose ahead, lights glowing warmly from the windows. Other cars were parked along the circular drive. Laughter spilled from inside. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Maybe she had overreacted, or maybe not. She stepped out of the car with practiced grace, hiding the tremble in her knees. The driver offered a slight nod before driving away. Before she could knock, the door opened. Jade stood there, radiant in silk, her smile wide and polished. "Eleanor," she beamed, "finally. We've been waiting." Jade's arms opened in a well-practiced sweep, as if welcoming a dignitary rather than a mother-in-law she'd never met. Her lips formed the perfect smile, bright, crisp, and hollow. "Eleanor," she said again, drawing her into a hug that felt more like a pose for cameras than affection. Come in. You look wonderful." Eleanor stepped inside, blinking against the warm lighting that spilled from crystal chandeliers. The entryway was palatial, marble floors, gold-framed art, staircases that curled like ribbons. Somewhere inside, classical music played, the kind that sounded expensive. A gust of laughter erupted from the left. A dozen people milled about, glasses of champagne in hand, voices rising in curated joy. Strangers, all of them. "Are these your friends?" Eleanor asked. Jade gave a delighted little laugh. "Oh, Marcus invited a few people from work, to make the evening more festive." Eleanor said nothing, just nodded slowly. Her eyes scanned the room. No familiar faces, no neighbors, no cousins, no one who'd ever set foot in her little house in Ohio. From the top of the staircase, Marcus appeared like a theater actor hitting his mark. He descended with flair, wearing a tailored navy suit, arms outstretched. "Mom," he called, crossing the floor quickly. "You made it." He pulled her into a hug, tight but not warm. There was something staged in the way he held her, his hands firm on her back like a politician working a room. "You look great," he said, truly. "So do you," she replied quietly. "Very successful." His smile flickered, then held. "Let me get you something to drink, champagne?" "I'd rather water." He nodded, disappearing into the crowd. Jade linked her arm through Eleanor's. "Let me show you around," she said, steering her through the sea of strangers. The living room was a magazine cover, neutral tones, designer furniture, curated bookshelves with untouched spines. The kitchen gleamed with chrome appliances Eleanor didn't know how to use. The dining room table, set for 20, was lined with bone china and monogram napkins. "It's beautiful," Eleanor offered. Jade beamed. "Thank you. Marcus wanted something timeless, like legacy, you know?" Eleanor's fingers brushed a chair back. Wood, polished, expensive. But legacy wasn't in tables or napkins. Legacy was in hands scrubbed raw from ironing uniforms, in hours at a laundromat while your child did homework on a folding table. Jade guided her toward the back patio, where more guests laughed over wine. A man in a pink blazer tapped his glass with a fork. "To the woman of the hour," he announced. "To Eleanor." A few people turned to clap. One or two even smiled warmly. Most raised their glasses without knowing who they toasted. Eleanor smiled politely and took a small step back. That's when she saw her. Near the kitchen entrance, partially hidden behind a marble column, stood a woman in a black uniform. Older, perhaps in her late 50s, hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes met Eleanor's, and something passed between them. A pause. Recognition. Not of face, but of spirit. The woman gave a small nod and disappeared into the kitchen. Eleanor exhaled and moved toward a side table where glasses of drinks were arranged. Her hand reached for a flute of water, but her fingers trembled slightly. Tired or nervous, she wasn't sure, and the glass slipped. It hit the edge and tumbled to the floor, shattering in a bright spray of sound. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Jade stepped forward with a quick, practiced laugh. "It's okay. No harm done." Marcus reappeared with a towel and began blotting at the carpet like he was in a commercial. But Eleanor wasn't looking at them. Her eyes were on the woman from before. The housekeeper, Rosa, knelt to gather the shards. Her movements were swift but delicate, like she was used to cleaning messes no one wanted to admit existed. As she leaned in, she whispered without moving her lips, "You need to leave before it's too late." The words chilled Eleanor more than the spilled water ever could. Rosa stood, offered a shallow nod, and disappeared again through the kitchen door. Marcus helped Eleanor back to her feet, smiling too brightly. "You okay, Mom? Nerves? It's been a big day." She nodded slowly. "Yes, maybe just too many people." He laughed. "You'll get used to it. Tonight's all about you." But something had shifted. Eleanor looked around and saw the masks for what they were. Smiles stretched too tight, compliments a beat too late, touches that lingered only for the sake of show. She had come for family, but what she'd walked into was theater, and someone, at least one person, had already seen behind the curtain. After the incident with the shattered glass, Eleanor expected to be left alone for a while, some quiet corner where she could gather her thoughts. But instead, Jade appeared at her side, polished and poised as ever. "Let's get you out of the crowd," she said gently, her voice sweet but insistent. "You need a moment, and I want to show you something special." Without waiting for a reply, Jade slipped her arm around Eleanor's and led her through a side door, away from the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. The hallway dimmed as they moved toward a more private part of the mansion. The transition from party to silence felt abrupt, like crossing backstage in the middle of a performance. Eleanor's heels clicked against hardwood floors until they reached a large door at the end of the corridor. Jade opened it slowly. "This is Marcus's study," she said, guiding Eleanor inside. The room smelled of leather and old money. Books lined one wall, untouched. A large mahogany desk dominated the space, flanked by tall windows covered in velvet curtains. On the wall behind the desk hung an oil painting of Marcus. Not a photograph, but a painted portrait, the kind usually reserved for old money patriarchs. Eleanor kept her face neutral. Jade gestured to a plush chair. "Please sit." Eleanor did. Jade took the seat across from her and crossed her legs delicately, like a therapist preparing for a session. "I know all of this must be overwhelming," Jade began, her voice carefully modulated, "after so much time apart." Eleanor nodded slightly, her purse still clutched in her lap. "I want you to know how grateful we are," Jade continued. "Marcus and we talk about you often. We've made mistakes, but tonight is a new beginning." Eleanor said nothing. She watched Jade's hands, perfectly still. "We've also been thinking about the future," Jade went on. "About your future. About how we can help." The air thickened. Eleanor's grip on her purse tightened. "We know you've worked hard your whole life," Jade said gently. "You deserve rest, comfort, a plan." "A plan?" Eleanor echoed. "Yes," Jade said. "You're not getting any younger, Eleanor, and things can happen, quickly, accidents, confusion. It's important to have your affairs in order." Eleanor arched a brow, her voice calm. "Do you think I'm confused now?" Jade laughed lightly. "Oh no, of course not. You're sharp. But that's exactly the time to make smart decisions, before it's too late." Before Eleanor could respond, the door creaked open. Marcus entered, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Ladies," he said with a smile too wide, "I thought you might need refreshments." He handed 1 glass to Eleanor. She accepted it with a nod, but made no move to drink. Marcus sat on the edge of the desk, casual and confident. "We've been talking," he said, "about how we can make life easier for you." He paused, watching her carefully. "I know things between us haven't been ideal, but I want to change that. I want to take care of you, Mom." Eleanor looked at the glass in her hand, then up at him. "You want to take care of me," she repeated. He nodded. "Yes, we've got the space, the resources. Jade has been researching elder care laws, power of attorney, that sort of thing." The phrase dropped like a stone into still water. Power of attorney. Eleanor shifted in her seat. "You think I need someone to sign for me?" Marcus raised his hands. "Not now. Just eventually. It's about being proactive, responsible." Before Eleanor could answer, the door cracked open again. Rosa entered carrying a tray with a cloth napkin and a bowl of mixed nuts. She moved quietly, head down. Her eyes flicked toward Eleanor's lap just briefly, then back to the tray. She approached the desk, set the tray down, then passed by Eleanor's chair. As she did, she let her hand brush Eleanor's coat. Just for a second, a folded slip of paper slid into Eleanor's pocket without a sound. No one else noticed. "I'll leave you to it," Rosa said softly, backing out of the room. Eleanor waited until the door shut. She slipped a hand into her coat pocket. The note was small, handwritten, just 4 words: "Don't eat, don't sign." Her stomach twisted. She looked at the glass of wine still resting in her hand. The scent of oak and berries floated up, but it made her nauseous now. Marcus leaned forward. "Try it. You'll love it. We had it imported." "I'm pacing myself," she said, placing the glass down on the desk with care. Jade's smile faltered just a hair. Marcus tilted his head. "Since when do you say no to wine?" Eleanor smiled softly. "Since I became old enough to know when not to trust it." A silence settled in the room, heavy and awkward. Marcus chuckled, but it didn't sound genuine. "That's a good one, Mom." Eleanor stood. "I think I'll rejoin the party." Jade rose as well, her tone a touch too sweet. "Of course, we'll talk again later. It's important." "Very," Eleanor said. As she walked toward the door, she could feel Marcus watching her, not like a son, like a man calculating. She kept her posture straight, her pace slow but deliberate. The hallway outside was colder than before, and the mask she'd worn for their benefit, it slipped off now. She knew what they were doing, and they had no idea she knew. When Eleanor stepped back into the dining room, the volume of the party surged once again. The music had changed. Now something jazzy, meant to seem relaxed, but landing just a little too rehearsed. The guests had moved to the long mahogany table where name cards and polished silverware waited like stage props. The chandelier above glowed golden, casting faceted light across the room. Marcus stood at the head of the table, motioning for everyone to take their seats. When his eyes found Eleanor, he lit up like a salesman spotting a hesitant buyer. "There she is," he said, lifting his wine glass in mock salute. "The woman who made me who I am." Polite laughter trickled through the guests. Eleanor made her way to the seat they had clearly saved for her, at the far end of the table opposite Marcus. He raised his glass again. "I want to say a few words if you'll indulge me," he said, his voice smooth with performance. Eleanor sat, folding her napkin slowly across her lap. Jade gave her a glowing smile from the seat to Marcus's right. "This woman," Marcus continued, gesturing toward Eleanor, "worked harder than anyone I know, ran a laundromat for 30 years, raised me on grit and grace, sacrificed everything so I could go to college, build my career, and make something of myself." Applause followed. Eleanor managed a small smile, but her stomach churned. It was all true, at least the parts he picked. But hearing it like this, reduced to applause lines, felt like someone else reading her diary on a stage. Marcus went on. "She used to pack me peanut butter sandwiches with little notes, told me I could do anything, be anyone, and I believed her." He raised his glass higher. "To Eleanor, for giving me everything." Everyone echoed the toast. "To Eleanor." She lifted her water glass but didn't drink. He had said the right things, kind things, the kind of things she'd longed to hear for years, but they rang hollow, perfectly delivered, perfectly timed, and far too late. As the servers brought in the appetizers, Marcus leaned in. "Mom," he called gently across the table, "do you remember that time we broke the washer at the shop, and you told Mr. Gordon it was your fault just so I wouldn't get in trouble?" Eleanor blinked. "That never happened." "I was what? 12, he added. "You grounded me later, but still took the blame that day. That's love." A few guests chuckled. Someone cooed, "Ah." Eleanor forced a smile, but something inside her shifted. That washer hadn't broken. Marcus had jammed a wrench into it trying to impress a girl, and Mr. Gordon had caught him red-handed. Eleanor had made him apologize, publicly. There had been no sacrifice, no soft landing. It had been a lesson. Why rewrite it? Why now? Jade touched Marcus's shoulder lightly. "She remembers, of course she does." Eleanor's hands tensed under the table. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced down. A new message from an unknown number. "There's a camera above the fireplace. They want footage of you signing." Her mouth went dry. She looked up casually, letting her eyes scan the room. And there it was, just above the ornate mantel, tucked discreetly into the design of a gold-framed mirror. A small, dark lens. "Mom," Marcus said, "I was just telling Jade the other day. Remember how you used to count quarters after every shift? Stack them into little towers? I thought it was silly then, but now I get it." Eleanor smiled faintly, trying not to reveal anything. "Do you?" she asked quietly. "Every cent mattered," he said. "You taught me that." She nodded, sipping water slowly. The appetizers were cleared, wine glasses refilled. Jade motioned to the staff, and someone brought out a covered silver tray. The main course, roasted lemon chicken, filled the air with rich, citrusy scent. "It's your favorite," Jade said. Eleanor nodded politely. She picked at the edge of her chicken, but made no move to eat. Marcus raised his fork. "So, have you thought about what we talked about earlier? Making sure things are secure for the future? We've got the paperwork, you know. No pressure, just when the moment feels right. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure if they should be hearing this. Eleanor forced a small laugh. "Tonight's about celebration, isn't it?" "Of course," Jade chimed in quickly. "But it's all ready, just in case. We thought it might give you peace of mind." Eleanor looked down at her plate. Then slowly she let her shoulders slump, her posture shift. She reached for her wine, brought it to her lips, then paused. She blinked, swayed slightly in her seat, and let the glass tilt, just enough to spill a few drops onto her sleeve. "Oh," she murmured, pulling a napkin to dab at it. "I must be more tired than I thought." Marcus leaned forward, concerned but curious. "You okay, Mom?" "I might just need a moment," she said, slurring slightly. All this excitement. She stood slowly, letting her knees wobble just a bit. "Do you want me to help you to a room?" Jade asked quickly, rising. "No," Eleanor said with a small, sleepy smile. "Just the restroom. I'll be fine." She moved carefully, not too fast, not too steady, just believable enough. As she turned down the hallway, the sound of conversation resumed behind her. And once she was out of sight, her back straightened, her steps quickened. She wasn't dizzy. She was done pretending. Now it was time to find out just how deep this performance went. The moment Eleanor turned the corner and vanished from view, the act slipped from her shoulders like an old coat. Her steps quickened, sharper now, driven by instinct, sharpened by years of navigating hardship. She bypassed the powder room and made for the far end of the hall where she had seen Rosa disappear earlier that evening. The kitchen buzzed with soft motion, staff clearing trays, hushed orders passed from one pair of hands to another. Rosa stood at the far sink, washing delicate dessert spoons with robotic grace. When she saw Eleanor approach, her eyes widened slightly. "I need a word," Eleanor said under her breath, glancing over her shoulder. Without a word, Rosa dried her hands and gestured subtly toward the pantry door. Eleanor followed, stepping into a narrow corridor lined with storage shelves and wine racks. The door shut behind them with a soft click. "They're watching me," Eleanor whispered. "But I got your note. Thank you." Rosa nodded, her voice low. "There's more. You need to see it." "See what?" Rosa hesitated. Then, "Documents, papers, kept in the basement office. Originals are somewhere else, but I found copies, notes, plans. There's even..." She paused. "Something strange. About your son." The word struck oddly in Eleanor's chest. "Show me." Rosa led her toward the rear of the pantry, where a panel behind the lower shelves slid open, revealing a narrow staircase. The air grew cooler with every step downward. The basement smelled of damp stone and paper. The light overhead buzzed when Rosa flicked the switch. A low, dim glow revealed a small office space, more practical than decorative. Filing cabinets, a printer, a desk with a heavy monitor still faintly warm. Rosa moved to a cabinet and pulled out a thin stack of folders. "They're prepping for you to sign tomorrow morning if you don't do it tonight," she said. "They've even coordinated with a notary, someone on their payroll." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she opened the first folder. It was labeled, "Power of Attorney, Final Version." Her name. Marcus's name, legal language assigning rights to her son for all medical, financial, and estate matters. "They were going to drug me," she whispered. Rosa nodded solemnly. "It's in here. I found this too." She passed over a small plastic bag containing a vial and a folded paper labeled Dose Plan EH. Eleanor's eyes stung. She flipped through more pages. An itinerary, a guest list, notations for what topics Marcus should raise at dinner, Jade's suggested timing for the wine. All of it planned. Then something caught her eye. Another folder, thinner, marked simply Heritage. She opened it. Inside was a DNA test, dated over a year ago. Her name, Marcus's name. The results showed a non-match. Probability of maternity, 0.0%. Her hand gripped the folder so tightly the paper began to crumple. This isn't real," she murmured. Rosa's expression was unreadable. I didn't know what it meant. I thought you did. Eleanor staggered back a step and leaned against the cold wall. No match. Her mind scrambled to process it. Was it a mistake? A fabrication? Or something she had never dared to consider? She thought back to the hospital, the day Marcus was born. There'd been complications. She remembered the nurse with trembling hands, the long wait to hold him. He had come to her bundled, already cleaned, with a tiny name tag on his wrist. She never questioned it, never thought she had to. Had they given her the wrong baby? No, she told herself, no. He was hers. She raised him, fed him, loved him, even when he didn't love her back. Tears welled up but didn't fall. Why would they keep this? Eleanor asked, voice barely above a whisper. To protect themselves if something went wrong, Rosa offered. To deny you later? Eleanor closed the folder. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Whatever Marcus was, whatever he had become, it wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was something deeper. Something that shook the foundation of who she was as a mother, not because of biology, but because she had spent decades sacrificing for someone who now planned to erase her entirely, and perhaps never truly felt tied to her in the first place. I need copies, she said. Rosa handed her a flash drive. Already done. Eleanor looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not just as help, but as someone who'd been watching this play unfold from the wings. Why are you helping me? She asked. Rosa's gaze didn't flinch. Because I've seen what they do to people they think are disposable. Eleanor nodded slowly. She slipped the DNA test, the power of attorney, and the flash drive into her purse. Then she straightened her coat, refastened the top button, and inhaled deeply. We go back upstairs, she said. I smile, I eat nothing, I drink nothing, and I sign nothing. Rosa gave a tight nod. Together, they climbed the stairs. As the false warmth of the chandeliers greeted her again, Eleanor felt something shift deep inside. Not fear, not rage, resolve. Let them think she was just an old woman with a trembling hand. They had no idea what that hand had lifted, what it had built, what it had buried, and what it was still capable of protecting. The party had mellowed into that sleepy phase where champagne dulled laughter and dessert clung to silver spoons. Conversations turned to vacations and investments, safe ground for the guests who had already forgotten why they toasted Eleanor in the first place. She returned to her seat with Rosa's warning and the DNA results still burning in her purse like smuggled fire. Marcus met her eyes from across the table. Feeling better? He asked. Eleanor gave him a soft smile, nodding. Just needed a breather. He leaned back in his chair, visibly pleased that she'd returned. To him, she was back in place. The script could resume. She picked at her food, sipping only water, offering polite replies, but her mind was elsewhere, back in that cold basement staring at the folder marked Heritage, back to a sterile hospital room 39 years ago. I remember that night like lightning, she said suddenly, interrupting Jade mid-story about their vineyard plans in Sonoma. Jade blinked. I'm sorry? Eleanor didn't answer her. She was already adrift in the memory. The nurses were flustered. It was storming outside. Samuel wasn't allowed in because of an emergency in the OR. The birth was difficult, breech. I was under for most of it. The table fell quiet. When I woke up, there was a baby boy in my arms. They said he was mine, and I never questioned it. Why would I? Marcus looked uncomfortable. What are you talking about? She turned her gaze toward him. You were beautiful, so quiet. And when I held you, it didn't matter that I'd missed your first cry. I believed you were mine. I chose to believe it every day after that. He scoffed nervously. Mom, are you okay? You sound confused? She finished for him. That's the idea, isn't it? Jade stood up. Maybe we should take a short break. I'm not finished, Eleanor said sharply, her voice cutting through the air like a snapped wire. The room froze. She glanced down at her purse, then back at Rosa, who stood silently at the dining room entrance. Their eyes met. Rosa gave the slightest nod. Later, when they retreated into the study again under the pretense of needing rest, Rosa locked the door behind them and pulled out her phone. "I was going to keep this for insurance," Rosa said, her voice tight, "but you deserve to hear it." She tapped play. Jade's voice crackled through the speaker, low and venomous. "You don't understand, Marcus. She's sitting on a fortune in property. The laundromats, the rental units, the old house, it's all still in her name, and she's aging. Every day she doesn't sign is one step closer to someone else sniffing around. She's a living gold mine, and she doesn't even know it." The recording ended. Eleanor's knees buckled slightly. She lowered herself into the leather chair as the weight of it all pressed down. Not just greed, not just betrayal, dehumanization. She'd been reduced to a commodity, a living gold mine. Not a mother, not even a person, just a key to unlock assets. She doesn't even know it. Eleanor whispered the phrase aloud, as if testing how deeply it could cut. "I think she does now," Rosa said, her tone laced with fury. Eleanor stared at her hands. These were the same hands that had stitched Marcus's Halloween costumes, packed his lunchboxes, written checks for overdue tuition. They had worked, cleaned, clutched his feverish forehead through long nights, and he had never loved her. Maybe because he couldn't. Maybe because he wasn't hers. Or maybe that had never mattered at all. Maybe some people simply lacked the wiring. The thought wasn't comforting, but it was clarifying. "He never called me Mom when no one else was around," she said quietly. Rosa sat beside her. "You don't have to go back to the table." "I do," Eleanor said. "They think they've trapped me with their smiles and fine wine. They think I'm old, fragile, alone." "You're none of those things," Rosa said. Eleanor smiled bitterly. "They're right about one." Rosa looked concerned. "I am alone," Eleanor continued, "but not helpless and not done." Outside the study, laughter resumed. Someone clinked a glass again. The house returned to its polished rhythm. Eleanor stood slowly, straightened her coat, adjusted her necklace, checked her purse. She would play her role for now, but the second act? That would belong to her. Eleanor returned to the dining room with the poise of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Her steps were slow, not from age, but from deliberation. Every eye followed her as she took her seat, folded her napkin, and smiled softly at no one in particular. Marcus stood up the moment she entered, his voice warm and rehearsed. "There you are. We were worried." She waved a hand gently. "I'm fine. Just needed a moment to gather myself." Jade placed a hand over her heart. "You had us all concerned, Eleanor. The night's for you, after all." Eleanor met her gaze, smile never wavering. "And I intend to make the most of it." Bam! Marcus poured himself more wine. "We were just about to bring out dessert. The notary's on his way. He's discreet, don't worry, no pressure. We can do this all on your terms." Eleanor took a breath, then exhaled with delicate control. "You're right," she said. "I've thought about it, and maybe it is time." The words hung in the air like perfume, sweet and carefully applied. Marcus blinked, surprised at her shift. "I've been selfish," she continued. "Suspicious, holding on to things that don't matter in the grand scheme. I don't want there to be bad blood between us." Jade's eyes widened slightly, lips parting in controlled disbelief. "You'd really consider signing tonight?" Marcus asked, stepping closer, glass still in hand. Eleanor nodded. "If it gives you peace of mind, I just want to do the right thing." Marcus's smile returned in full. That's wonderful, Mom." Jade moved fast, too fast. "I'll get the documents from the study." "Wait," Eleanor said, her voice still gentle. They froze. "I have one condition." Jade paused. "Of course. Anything." I want a witness, someone neutral, someone I trust. Marcus's brow furrowed. We have guests here. Friends from my firm, if you'd like. No, Eleanor interrupted. I'd prefer someone who sees everything but is often ignored. She turned toward the doorway. I want Rosa. Silence stretched. Jade's smile wavered. Rosa, she's working tonight and... She's part of this house, isn't she? Eleanor asked calmly. She's seen more than any of us. If I'm to hand over everything I've built, I want her there. Marcus hesitated. Jade gave him a sharp look, her mouth twitching just once. Then Jade nodded too quickly. Of course, let me get her. As Jade disappeared, Marcus knelt beside Eleanor's chair, lowering his voice. This means the world to me, Mom. Really. I promise we'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry anymore. Eleanor reached out, patted his hand. I know. She let her fingers linger just a moment longer than comfort allowed. Jade returned moments later, Rosa in tow. The housekeeper's expression was carefully blank, but Eleanor saw it. The steel behind her eyes. The quiet readiness. Rosa stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. You called for me, ma'am. Eleanor turned toward the table. Yes, I'd like you to witness this. Marcus gestured toward the space beside Eleanor. Of course. Please, Rosa. She took the seat, calm, silent, and Eleanor noticed it then, just beneath the collar of her uniform. A small black pin, not a pin at all. A camera, tiny, discreet, recording everything. Jade laid the documents in front of Eleanor. A pristine pen followed, gleaming silver. This just confirms you're allowing Marcus to act on your behalf, she said smoothly. For medical, financial, and legal matters, it's a precaution. I understand, Eleanor replied, fingers brushing the page. Beside her, Rosa folded her hands in her lap. The red light on the tiny camera blinked once, invisible to all but those who knew. Marcus poured fresh wine, filled Eleanor's glass last. To a new chapter, he said. Eleanor raised her glass, tilted it toward her lips. The rim touched her mouth. She smiled, then set it down. Later, she said, I like to sign with a clear head. Jade's smile tightened, but she said nothing. Eleanor lifted the pen, uncapped it slowly, letting silence stretch. Then she paused. Before I sign, she said, her tone still soft, I want to read the last page again, out loud. Marcus laughed, but the sound cracked. That's not necessary. It's all standard. I insist, Eleanor replied. She picked up the final page, scanned it, then began to read. In the event that Eleanor Huxley becomes medically incapacitated, all decision-making authority shall transfer to Marcus Huxley, biological son of record. She stopped. Biological son of record. She met Marcus's eyes. Do you remember the day I brought you home? She asked him. He blinked. What? You cried all night. I didn't know how to hold you yet, but I stayed up. Learned how. Mom, what are you... You weren't my blood, but I made you my son. He froze. Jade stepped forward. Eleanor, I don't think... And I loved you, Eleanor continued, voice unwavering. Even now, despite everything, part of me still wants to. But you don't want a mother. You want an asset. Rosa stood quietly beside her, not flinching. Eleanor turned the page over, then, without a word, tore it neatly in half. The sound cracked across the room like a gunshot. You said you wanted everything in writing, she said, standing slowly. Here's my answer. Marcus lunged forward. What the hell are you doing? Exposing you, Eleanor said simply. The camera blinked. Jade's face drained of color, and somewhere behind them a doorbell rang. The notary had arrived, but the signature would never come. The silence after Eleanor tore the document was deafening. Marcus's eyes were wide, wild, like he couldn't process what had just happened. Jade stood frozen, the color drained from her face, fingers clenched at her sides. The guests around the table shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, unsure if this was part of some dramatic toast or a family implosion unfolding before their eyes. Then Eleanor moved again. Slowly, calmly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small object, her phone. She tapped the screen and flipped it so the camera faced the room. On the screen, a red icon pulsed. "Smile," she said softly. "You're live." Jade's mouth fell open. "What are you doing?" "Letting the world meet the real you," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the hush. "This phone has been recording since I returned from the basement. Rosa wore a second cam, and the flash drive? Already sent." "Sent where?" Marcus barked. "To someone who still believes family means something," she replied. "To my lawyer, to the press, to the police." A murmur rippled through the room. Rosa stepped forward now, no longer blending into the background. "I suggest everyone pay close attention," she said, pulling a folded stack of papers from her apron. "These are copied documents pulled from your basement files," she announced, her voice clear and calm. "Power of attorney drafts, asset transfer blueprints, medical consent plans involving sedatives, a test proving Eleanor is not Marcus's biological mother, used as leverage." Jade's hands shook. "This is absurd." Eleanor's voice turned steel. "What's absurd is that I gave you both everything, and you thought I wouldn't notice when you tried to steal the rest." Rosa held up the DNA test. "Marcus Huxley, 0.0% maternity probability, dated 13 months ago, still stored in your files." "I didn't even know about that," Marcus shouted. "Then why was it in your drawer?" Eleanor countered. Jade took a shaky breath and turned toward the guests. "Look, everyone, this is clearly a misunderstanding. Emotions are running high." "That's an interesting spin," a voice said from the far end of the table. All eyes turned to a man in a charcoal gray suit. He hadn't said much all evening, had sat politely, sipping wine, laughing on cue. Now he stood, slipping a badge from his coat pocket. "Agent Noah Carlin," he said, "Financial Crimes Division. I've been embedded with the Greater Essex Fraud Task Force for 8 months. And tonight," he nodded to Eleanor, "was the final puzzle piece." Marcus stumbled back a step. You're not one of my clients." Agent Carlin shook his head. "You should vet your party lists better." Rosa stepped to Eleanor's side. "She didn't come here for revenge. She came for answers." "And you gave us plenty," Carlin said, pulling out a small radio. "Request backup to Montclair address. Suspects Jade and Marcus Huxley. Fraud, elder exploitation, and attempted financial coercion." Jade's expression cracked completely. Without a word, she bolted. "Claire!" Marcus shouted, but she was already halfway to the kitchen, knocking over a tray of glasses. Eleanor didn't move. She stood as still as the moment she watched Samuel's casket lower into the ground, because some betrayals didn't call for anger. They demanded silence. Footsteps echoed in the hall as security, alerted by Agent Carlin, rushed past. "Do not let her leave the premises," he called. Marcus's face twisted. "This is insane. She's manipulating you all." He turned to Eleanor, pleading now. "Mom, please, don't do this. I messed up, I admit it. But you're still my mother." Eleanor looked at him long and hard. "No," she said gently. "I was your mother. Until tonight." A ripple of gasps moved through the guests. Agent Carlin stepped between them. "Mr. Huxley, you're under investigation. I suggest you say nothing more." Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. His shoulders sagged as the weight of the moment sank in. Sirens wailed in the distance. Eleanor turned to Rosa. "Let's go outside. I've had enough air in this house of masks." Together they walked past the stunned guests, past shattered illusions and broken glass, into the crisp night. On the porch, Eleanor paused. The stars above were faint but visible. The cool air kissed her cheeks. Somewhere behind them, chaos erupted. Shouts, footsteps, the clink of handcuffs, but she didn't turn around. She stood unshaken as the wind lifted the edge of her scarf. "This is what peace feels like," she said quietly. Rosa stood beside her, hands folded. He never saw it coming. Eleanor nodded. That's because he never truly saw me at all. And in that moment, under the stars, the mother who had once been forgotten became unforgettable. The harsh buzz of fluorescent lights greeted them at the Montclair Police Department. Eleanor sat in a corner of the waiting area, wrapped in Rosa's silence like a shawl. She hadn't said much since arriving. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself now. In an adjacent room through a one-way mirror, Marcus sat slumped in a metal chair, his hands folded, eyes down. His once perfect suit was wrinkled, the tie askew, his bravado stripped like peeling paint. Every few minutes he shifted in his seat but said nothing. In a separate room, Jade leaned forward, palms flat on the interrogation table. Her makeup had smeared just enough to betray the panic beneath her otherwise flawless exterior. "I want a deal," she said to the detective across from her. I'll cooperate. I'll give you everything, but I want full protection. Witness relocation if it gets bad." The detective raised an eyebrow. "What kind of everything are we talking about?" Jade inhaled sharply. Marcus didn't just plan to steal her money. He already started, months ago. He forged her signature on credit applications, opened lines of credit in her name, transferred portions of her retirement accounts. She never saw a cent. The detective didn't react. He just let the tape recorder roll. "He even used fake medical reports," Jade continued, her voice lower now, "to make it seem like she was in cognitive decline. So if she contested the power of attorney later, it would look like confusion. Dementia." She shuddered. "I told him to stop, but he kept saying we were so close." The detective leaned back. "You're saying Marcus fabricated health records?" "Yes." "And impersonated her on financial forms?" "Yes." A pause. "And you knew?" Her voice cracked. "I didn't think it would go that far. I didn't think... But you stayed." Jade closed her eyes. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" There was a long silence before she answered. "Of becoming irrelevant." He said if we got everything, we'd be set for life. We could finally be free. Free. The word echoed even as the officer stepped out to consult with the DA. Across the hall, Eleanor waited, not impatiently, just enduring, like she always had. A young officer approached her, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Huxley," he said softly, "you're free to go, but the district attorney would like to speak to you later this week if you're willing. Also," he hesitated, "there's a lot of media interest." Eleanor lifted her eyes. "I'm not interested in them." "I understand, but you're something of a local hero now. The footage, the recording, it's making waves. People are calling you brave, iconic." Eleanor managed a faint smile. "I'm just tired," she said, "and I want to go home." The officer nodded almost sheepishly. "Of course." Outside, cameras were already gathering like vultures around a feast. Flashbulbs popped. Voices shouted, "Eleanor, is it true your son tried to drug you? Do you regret raising him? Are you pressing charges personally?" She didn't answer a single one. Rosa shielded her as best she could, guiding her toward a waiting car. As they pulled away, Eleanor looked out the window, not at the reporters, but at the trees lining the street, their branches bare, waiting for spring. At the station, Marcus's fate was sealed by Jade's confession. He was denied bail. The charges, financial fraud, elder exploitation, falsifying medical records, and conspiracy. By morning, his face was on every major outlet. The headline read, "Local businessman caught in attempted inheritance scheme, betrayal in broad daylight." But Eleanor never saw it. She had unplugged the television, let the newspaper sit on the porch. She had no interest in watching the destruction of a man she once cradled as an infant. Instead, she returned to her home. The lights hummed as they always had. The kettle boiled with that familiar squeal. The walls, though old, felt steadier than any mansion. She sat at her kitchen table, the same one Samuel had varnished decades ago. Rosa stood nearby brewing tea. You should be proud, Rosa said. Eleanor stirred her cup slowly. I don't feel proud. Rosa hesitated. Then what do you feel? Eleanor looked out the window, where the last light of day spilled over the fence. I feel like I survived something I didn't even know I was drowning in. Rosa said nothing, just placed a biscuit next to her tea. I don't want interviews, Eleanor continued, or speeches or awards. Then don't take them. I just want silence, peace. Rosa nodded. You've earned it. And for the first time in what felt like years, Eleanor believed that might be true. The first thing Eleanor noticed when she stepped into her old house again was the smell. Aged wood, lemon polish, and something fainter underneath, the scent of home. It hadn't changed. Not really. The creaks in the floor, the uneven light in the hallway, the way the curtains swayed even when the windows were closed. All of it waited for her like faithful companions. She took off her coat slowly, hung it on the wooden peg by the door. Her purse, lighter now, rested on the side table. For a moment she stood still, taking it in. No reporters, no microphones, no son pretending to love her. Just quiet. The kettle on the stove still whistled when the flame got too high. The faucet in the bathroom still needed coaxing before hot water came out. And her favorite chair, worn, sunken, was exactly as she'd left it. Time had not betrayed this place. She walked into the living room and ran her hand across the old upright piano Samuel had once tried to tune himself. It was dustier now, but intact. She tapped one key. It rang out, off-key but honest. The next morning, she walked down Main Street with a paper bag in hand, scarf wrapped around her neck, and an ease in her step she hadn't felt in years. The sun peeked through the clouds, and the bakery window fogged from the warmth inside. Children in bright jackets ran past her, laughing, their boots squeaking on wet pavement. When she reached the laundromat, she hesitated for just a second before unlocking the door. It was all still there. The smell of detergent, the hum of the machines, the squeaky, rolling carts. Dust coated the folding tables, and a few flyers from local events still clung to the corkboard near the entrance. She walked to the back room where the safe sat tucked under the counter, still locked, still hers. On the desk, there was a small stack of mail, most of it junk, but buried between catalogs and electric bills were 3 hand-addressed envelopes. She sat down, heart thudding gently, and opened the first. It was from a woman named Clarice, written in careful script. Dear Ms. Huxley, you may not remember me, but in 1997, my husband was laid off and I couldn't afford to wash my baby's clothes. You told me to bring the basket anyway, that I could pay when I had it. You even gave me extra soap. I never forgot your kindness. Watching the news, I recognized you. I just wanted you to know. You mattered to me. Eleanor blinked, her hand trembling slightly as she set the letter aside. The second was from a man named Julio. I was 14 when you caught me trying to steal quarters from the change machine. Instead of calling the police, you put me to work for a summer. That job kept me out of trouble. I own a barbershop now, thank you. The third was written in purple crayon. Thank you for the bubble gum. No name, no return address, just a child's drawing of a smiling woman and a big, noisy washing machine. Eleanor folded the letters slowly, one by one, and pressed them to her chest. Not for what they said, but for what they reminded her. Her story had never been about what Marcus tried to take. It had always been about what she gave. That afternoon, a knock came at her front door. Rosa stood there, bundled in a sweater, holding a small appliance wrapped in a kitchen towel. You forgot this, she said simply. Eleanor took it with both hands. It was her old tea kettle. The electric one she'd left behind, still dented near the spout, still humming faintly when plugged in. I thought you might want your rituals back, Rosa added, stepping inside. Eleanor set the kettle on the counter and smiled. They do help. Rosa sat at the table while Eleanor brewed the tea. No words needed. When the cups were ready, they sat quietly for a moment, steam rising between them. I got more letters, Eleanor said finally. Rosa looked up. From the people? Eleanor nodded. From the ones who mattered. She looked around the room at the shelves with Samuel's books, the fading curtains, the chipped tiles. You know, I thought I'd lost everything, but now I see I never really did. Rosa smiled gently. You just misplaced yourself for a while. Eleanor laughed softly. Maybe, but I'm back now. They drank their tea, and outside, snow began to fall. Not in great dramatic flurries, but in soft, steady flakes, coating the world in quiet white. Eleanor didn't turn on the TV that night. She didn't check the news or answer her phone or scroll through the avalanche of attention now bearing her name. She folded laundry instead. A small load, her sheets, a pair of old cardigans, and one scarf. Samuel's, still holding the faintest trace of his aftershave. She pressed it to her face, inhaled, then folded it with care. The snow fell in slow spirals, soft as breath. It clung gently to Eleanor's coat as she stepped carefully along the winding path through the cemetery. The world was hushed, blanketed, as though nature itself had bowed its head in reverence. She moved with purpose, though not haste. Her gloved fingers curled around a small bouquet of lilies. She found his grave beneath the old elm, where they had buried Samuel nearly 15 years ago. The stone was simple, honest, just like him. She knelt beside it, brushing away a thin layer of snow that had gathered across his name. Samuel Huxley, beloved husband, mechanic, and keeper of all things that needed fixing. She smiled at that. He'd hated the inscription when she first proposed it, called it silly, but it had stuck, and somehow it still fit. Sam, she said softly, placing the lilies at the base of the headstone. You wouldn't believe the week I've had. The wind stirred, rustling the brittle branches above. She stayed there, not speaking for a long while. Then, as if speaking to an old friend over coffee, she told him everything. The dinner, the forged papers, the camera, the betrayal, and the truth that shook her more than any signature ever could. He wasn't ours, she whispered. Not by blood. She paused. But you knew that, didn't you? She remembered his eyes that night in the hospital years ago. He'd stared at Marcus with such intense love, even as nurses moved too quickly, even as the baby wore a different tag than expected. But he was still ours, she continued. We raised him, loved him. Her voice cracked. I tried to see the best in him, Sam. I really did. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded letter, trembling slightly as she placed it beside the flowers. It came yesterday, she murmured. The letter had arrived with no return address, just a number printed on the corner, identifying the sender as an inmate at Essex County Correctional Facility. She'd recognized the handwriting instantly, the familiar slant of a child who once scribbled, "I love you, Mom," on fridge magnets and Mother's Day cards. She had read it 3 times. Mom, I know I have no right to call you that anymore. Maybe I never did. I don't know who I am right now. Not really. They told me everything. The test, the records. I didn't know I wasn't your biological son. That truth hit me harder than any cell door slamming shut. But what hurt more was knowing how I treated you. Knowing I built my life on your sacrifices and still tried to take more. You never owed me anything and I stole anyway. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I needed to tell you. The person I betrayed most wasn't just my mother. It was the only person who ever truly loved me. I'm sorry. For all of it. Marcus. She had sat with that letter in her lap for hours, her fingers tracing the ink as if the apology might become tangible if she held it long enough. But apologies, she'd learned, weren't magic. They didn't erase the wound. They simply acknowledged it. She touched the gravestone now, her voice steady. He says he didn't know. I believe him. She closed her eyes. But that doesn't change what he did. She rose slowly, brushing snow from her knees. I forgave him, she said aloud, not because he deserves it, but because I do. She turned to leave, then paused. Sam, If you see him on the other side someday, tell him I meant every hug, every lunch, every time I waited up. The love was real." She smiled sadly. And so was the betrayal. Then she walked away. Back at home, the snow had begun to lighten. The wind carried the scent of winter through slightly opened windows. Eleanor settled into her favorite chair, a cup of tea resting on the table beside her. Rosa had gone for the day, leaving behind a warm meal and a promise to visit tomorrow. The house was quiet, not empty. Quiet. Eleanor looked toward the window, where afternoon light now spilled in through thin curtains. It hit the wooden floor and stretched toward the mantel. There, folded neatly beside Samuel's pocket watch, was the old handkerchief, its edges worn but clean. She reached for it and held it to the light. It glowed faintly, a soft ivory hue against the sun. Everything she'd clung to, love, identity, legacy, it had been tested, nearly broken, but not erased. Because in the end, the house still stood, the tea still brewed, and she, Eleanor, still had her name. She smiled, small but whole. Outside, the snow melted slowly, and the world prepared itself for spring.